Welcome, everyone. My name is Mary Bergman, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to the 7th Annual Nantucket Book Festival. Yay! On behalf of our entire festival committee. And I really can't thank you enough for coming to our opening night celebration and to so many of our other festival events today. If you were at another one of our events, would you raise your hand? Oh, wow, isn't that great? Thank you, thank you. I think this is just such a beautiful space to be in all winter long when we're planning the book festival. We're in the library basement, or in coffee shops, or in our homes after work. In Nantucket in the winter, the sun sets about 4 in the afternoon. So it's sort of like being a dream to be here with you in this space, so close to the longest day of the year, in a room that's so full of light. And I'm so glad the sun came out because I didn't want to change that line. I want to thank all of our sponsors and donors who made so much of what happens this weekend possible. Jill Karp and Nantucket Island Resorts, the Nantucket Athenaeum, the Margaret Ritchie R. Battle Family Charitable Fund. Special thanks to the Unitarian Meeting House and to Mary Half for her support of the work of the Nantucket Book Foundation in our island schools. Thank you to all those listed on the back of the program and all those who gave after the program went to press. The year-round work of the Book Foundation, both in the schools and the festival, would not be possible if not for the loyalty of our festival goers and our friends in attending and supporting us. Now I'd like to turn things over to our festival co-founder and president of the Nantucket Book Foundation, Mary Haft. Mary?
Thank you, and thank you so much for being with us. You know, we are not here without all of you, and it means everything to look out and see your faces. Books can show us how to point our moral compass towards bravery, courage, and strength, are the words that our visiting author, Lori Halls Anderson, reminded our students, words that matter today more than ever. Books open into that wider world and take us to stories that inform, enliven, enlighten, and broaden our understanding of what it is to be human. Through the prism of people brought to life on the page or screen, everything starts with the written word. We can experience joys and sorrows, trials and tribulations, and the triumph that can emerge through strength of character. There's always going to be pain, Anderson said. That's the inoculation that literature provides. Our festival celebrates the power of words, the power of ideas. Our emergent young writers, whom we honor tonight, exemplify our greatest hope, finding the words to say what is in their heart, what is in their head. Our work is a partnership with the Nantucket schools, teachers, librarians, and administrators. Would everyone who is involved in the care and education of our children please stand and take a bow? This award would not happen without the time and talent of our two judges, Jim Salzer and Sandy Mitchell. Jim is not able to be with us tonight, but it is my great honor and privilege to present Sandy Mitchell.
Good evening. Jim Salzer and I, like some of you, have made it our life's work to engage young people in the power of the written word. And so we enjoy our opportunity to read local high school entries each year for this Nantucket Book Festival Young Writer Award. This year's topic was assigned as follows. Often we are quick to judge people and situations around us, only to discover there is more to that person or situation than we first imagined. So describe a time when you realized your original judgment or impression was either wrong or incomplete. So I am pleased to present to you this year's winning essays. Fourth runner-up, From Friends to Strangers, was written by 9th grader Waverly Brannigan, who addressed this topic through the lens of friendships and communication. Third runner-up, Alexandria Richards, a junior, wrote this line: "Judging a person only defines who you are. In her essay, Human Nature, Alexandria. And in her entry entitled Home, 11th grader Tatiana Lemus described with great honesty a visit to the country of her birth. Please welcome me. Thank you. First runner-up, Sophie Girardi, grade 9, beautifully shared her family's love and spirituality with tenderness in her essay, Before the Fog Lifted. Sophie? Congratulations, honey. And our winner of the 2018 Young Writer Award is freshman Katie Genthner, who pursued questions of faith and first impressions with lovely imagery in her essay, Believe. So, my fellow readers and writers, together we celebrate the voices of young people here and afar who share their experiences and thoughts with us in their writing. Thank you.
Congratulations to all our young writers, and I can't wait to see you back here again as authors at the Nantucket Book Festival one day. This evening's opening celebration is titled Difference is What Unites Us. We asked our featured authors tonight to speak from their different and unique perspectives, which each conveys so movingly in their work, as we embrace the notion in all that we share, in our different imperfect ways, a common humanity. I'd like to ask tonight's authors to join us on stage. And I'll be giving you very short introductions on each one. Tonight is really all about their words and their voices, and if you're interested in learning more, you can pick up their books at bookstores all around town. So our first speaker tonight is Min Jin Lee, whose debut novel, Free Food for Millionaires, was a #1 Book Sense pick, a New York Times Editor's Choice, a Wall Street Journal Juggle Book Club selection, a national bestseller. It was a top 10 novel of the year for Times of London, NPR's Fresh Air, and USA Today. Her recent novel, Pachinko, is a national bestseller, a New York Times Editor's Choice, and an American Bookseller's Indie Next Great Reads. Please join me in welcoming Min Jin Lee.
Good evening. I want to thank the volunteers for this incredible opportunity to be here. I think I feel safe to say that on behalf of all the writers here, we know that all the invisible work that the volunteers have done to create this free event comes miraculously, and we are so very, very grateful to all the volunteers, so thank you very much. I arrived on the island yesterday, and it was a little cold. And as usual, I hadn't packed properly. So after coffee, I walked into a really beautiful clothing store off of Main Street, and I tried on a coat that is well out of the budget of a fiction writer. And making small talk, the lovely shopkeeper asked me if I was new to Nantucket. And I carry a canvas tote bag, which my sisters tease me about because it's kind of shabby. And he stared at it. And I sold clothes for money when I was in college. I knew what he was doing. It was entirely harmless. He was just trying to figure out if I had any money. So he asked again, "Are you new to the area?" So I said, "I'm not from here." To which he said, "That's okay that you're not from here." And I said, "I know." Somewhere, my therapist was clapping. Now, bear in mind that the shopkeeper was perfectly innocent. But it reminded me of how often I am mistaken for a visitor whenever I leave New York City, my hometown, because of my physical envelope. It's true. I am racially and ethnically different from the majority of this country. And I am a statistical minority. And because I am of an Asian descent, no matter how much I love hamburgers, no matter how much passionately I root for the sports teams of my hometown, I know that I belong to a group of Americans who have historically been seen as permanently foreign. And then there are these other things that mark me as different. So when I was in high school, that's over 3 decades ago, 2 things happened which separated me from my peers. First, I fell in love with the novels of the great American writer Sinclair Lewis, who wrote, among other things, Main Street, Babbitt, Aerosmith, and recently, that's become rather important, It Can't Happen Here. And second, I donated blood to the American Red Cross, and they wrote me a letter and said, "Please never give blood again, because you are a chronic hepatitis B carrier." So consequently, I learned 2 things. One, I really loved great old fiction, which none of my friends read. And then I carried an illness in my body with a disease communicable through sex, blood, and through childbirth. So about Sinclair Lewis. He was a doctor's son, he was a 3rd son, and he was very awkward. He was very tall, he had no friends, and he had terrible acne. So of course I identified with him, because I too had no friends growing up. And importantly, he had gone to Yale. So I wanted to go to Yale. And I applied, and miraculously, I got in. And when I got there, because I'm a fiction writer, I am very vulnerable to magical thinking, I thought he would be there. He was not. He had graduated in 1908. So even though I love fiction so much that I chose a college based on a great writer whose work I just tore through, I knew that I would never be a writer because writers were not people like me. So I decided that I would major in economics. And then I took macroeconomics, and I learned that I cannot read graphs. So I thought again. And I knew that I couldn't major in English because people who majored in English had beautiful hair. And spectacular eyelashes. So I was out. English is my second language, and I knew that people like me couldn't be writers, but I really wanted to know some more, so I took a class in Asian American literature. And then I learned that there were 2 Korean women who had written books. And the first book that I read was called Dictée by Teresa Hak-young Cha. And after she wrote this incredibly marvelous, fantastic book, she was violently raped and murdered. And then I read a historical novel written by Run Young Kim, and it's called Clay Walls. Again, fantastic. And after she wrote it, she died of cancer. I declared my major as history. So the second thing about me that I learned in high school was that I was a chronic hepatitis B carrier. And in high school, I was asymptomatic, but then when I was in university, I expressed symptoms and I got very ill. And one day I had to go to Yale New Haven Hospital, and my parents were working at the store, so they couldn't come. And I met with Dr. Rubin, and he said to me that I would get cancer in my 20s or 30s in my liver. And I remember thinking, I had to be careful with my time. So before I graduated from college, I attended a lecture featuring an American missionary who served the Korean population in Japan. And he told a story about a 13-year-old boy from Osaka who was ethnically Korean, but he was culturally Japanese, and he had been born in Japan, and so were his parents. And one day, immediately after his middle school graduation, he climbed up to his apartment building and he jumped off to his death. And his parents were absolutely devastated. And they went through all of his things, and they found his middle school yearbook, and they found his graduation album in which his Japanese classmates had written, "Go back to where you belong. I hate you. You smell like kimchi," and they wrote the words, "Die, die, die." And this story burned into my brain, and I didn't know what to do with it, but I knew that it was really important. And after I graduated being a history major, I went to law school, and I got married, and I worked in a beautiful building as a lawyer, and I had wonderful clothes, and I thought I was pretty important. And then one day, because I'm a very good lawyer, and because I'm really good at reading all the homework that's assigned to me, one day I billed 300 hours, which I thought was urban legend. It can be done. And I went to my partner's office, and I was really proud because I had done all this work, and I thought he was going to tell me to go home, but he gave me more work. So without intending to, I quit. I said, I can't do this anymore. So I sat down, and I had $15,000 in the bank, and I thought that was so much money, and it would last forever. It did not. And I wrote a novel, and I got an agent, and it was rejected immediately. So from 1996, from 2003, I decided that I would write a book about those Korean Japanese people. And I wrote one. And after I finished it, I read it with colder eyes, and I realized it was horrid. So I did not send it out, and I was terribly discouraged. And I was also very ill. I had my son in 1998, and I suffered from all these joint issues. I couldn't open doorknobs, I couldn't walk up the stairs because the back tendons were inflamed. And my wrists hurt, and I was tired all the time. And my son was in preschool. And Dr. Magun said to me, "You are young. You should try this experimental drug called interferon B." So I did. And I gave myself shots every single day for several months. And the shots made me more ill than the actual chronic hepatitis, liver cirrhosis. And then, after 6 months of my hair falling out and having diarrhea every day and vomiting, I was cured. And Dr. Magun, who wears bow ties, and he's a tremendous man of science, said it was a miracle. And during this time, I was trying to take classes at community centers once a week to learn how to be a better writer, because I did not have an MFA, and I thought that I had wasted so much money getting a law degree, which I did not use, so I had to figure out how to be a better writer. And even though I was terribly discouraged and I had so many rejections that I could fill a 3-inch ring binder, I decided that I would keep reading, because reading is what really marked me as different from all of my peers. And one day, I read a book by V.S. Naipaul called A House for Mr. Biswas. And I finished it on the subway, and when it ended, I broke down into tears because it was so moving to me. And then I realized that I still had the power to write about the people who fascinated me, even though I had already failed with most of my life. And then I wrote Free Food for Millionaires, which became my first book to be published. And I wanted to write about money and class and ambition, and how the conventional ideas of such things didn't apply to people who are different, for those who are outside. And then in 2007, when the book came out, my husband got a job in Japan, and I did not want to go. But I did not want to get a new husband. It's true. So I went. And in Japan, I decided to return to my second novel, which was then called Motherland. And I started to interview all these Korean Japanese people. And then I realized why the second book that I had written was so absolutely horrible. I did not know these people at all. They were not victims, as I thought. Rather, they were ordinary people who did not want to seem different to the mainstream culture. So I took the old book that I had written and I threw it away and I started again. I have failed for far more many years than I have succeeded, if I have succeeded at all. This past year, I was rejected for 4 fellowships, 2 teaching positions, 1 editorship, and as you may know, I was a National Book Award finalist. And for those of you who don't know how the National Book Awards work, you get all dressed up, and you go there, and they announce the winner. I lost. So, how do I stay a writer when I'm pretty sure I never thought I could be one at all? And this is where I get to tell you about your superpowers and mine. I'm not sure if you knew you had these superpowers, but you do. You use them all the time. Perhaps you are a parent, and when your teenager hurts your feelings, why do you still stay awake at night waiting for him to come home? And when your mother is cranky, and she needs you to take her to the doctor, and she doesn't ask nicely, why do you leave work early to take her to her appointment? And when your best friend calls you crying while you're making dinner, why do you stop what you're doing to listen to her, even though dinner must be made, the dishes must be washed, and there are half a dozen things on your to-do list? It's because you have a superpower. You know how to love when it is difficult. You know how to love when you are tired. And you know that being different and being a statistical minority cannot be reason alone to quit. The parts of our lives that we love the most can be almost impossible to bear every day. But we bear it. And though our wishes are different, though our burdens are different, we have this power to care and to persist because we know we must. We know we must because we want to live lives that matter. So, I'm not from here, but you have been so gracious to me, and I want you to know that your kindness makes me stronger.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much. Our next writer that we're going to hear from is Imbolo Mbue, the author of the New York Times bestseller Behold the Dreamers, which won the PEN/Faulkner Award for Fiction, the Blue Metropolis Words to Change Award, and was an Oprah Book Club selection. Named a notable book of the year by the New York Times and the Washington Post, the novel has been translated into 10 languages, optioned for a movie, and adapted into an opera. Please join me in welcoming Imbolo Mbue.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Min Jin Lee. And I'm not happy that I'm going after you, but oh well. Somebody has to do it. And thank you, Mary, for that lovely version of my name. When you have a name like Imbolo Mbue, you get to hear every different kind of pronunciation for the name. Every time I'm being introduced, I wonder, what will I be called today? Usually people are very nice. They ask me, oh, Imbolo, help me get your name right. And like Mary was very kind. She did the same thing today. And then I spent like 10 minutes giving them a tutorial. You know, it's Imbolo and Mbue is one syllable. And they say, okay. And then they do it. They never get it right. And I say, okay, just get the im part right. You know, I am, everybody can say im. And then they try, then they go up there and they say, oh, ambulance, mebu, you know, something like that. But it's just one of the wonderful things about being different and having a different sort of name. Like Min said, being different in this culture and being an African immigrant also. I'm from Cameroon. I was born there and I was raised there, and I came here at 17 to go to college. And I never thought about becoming a writer, but I ended up becoming one. And my novel came out a couple of years ago. And it is about immigration. It's about immigrants during the financial crisis, and an immigrant family and a family of a wealthy New York City family. And because it came out during the election season of 2016 and during the Trump administration, I get asked a lot my opinions about, you know, immigrants. And Imbolo, what is it like for you? And I think it was last year or earlier this year, President Trump said something about African countries. I don't use dirty language. I can't repeat the words. I'm one of those goody two-shoes. But basically, I received a request from a national radio program to come on radio and talk about how I felt about it. You know, basically wanted me to answer the question, Imbolo Mbue, as an African immigrant, do you think Mr. Trump is a racist? I thought about it. I thought about using the opportunity to talk about the theme of this night, about difference and how it unites us. And I thought, you know, this would be a good opportunity because I'm sure we all agree that difference is what unites us. Because if you didn't, why would you be here tonight? I mean, look at those. I thought about the opportunity, but then I said, no, thank you, I'm going to pass. So I told my publicist, tell them thank you, but I'd rather not, you know, answer that question. And then not long after that, a very nice white person asked me in private, Imbolo Mbue, do you think Mr. Trump is a racist? My response was along the lines of, please don't ask me that question again. It's not that I don't believe we need to have a conversation about the topic. We need to hold our leaders accountable, and if they do not champion our shared values, we should condemn them and their actions. I am the native of a country where we've had the same dictator for 36 years, and even as a child, I was very aware of how little freedom of speech I had, which is why it's important to me that, you know, I am invited to speak and to say what I think, so thank you guys very much. So I do not take my freedom of speech lightly. The reason why I turned down that conversation was because in talking about Mr. Trump's failing, we spent too much time talking about him and others and too little time talking about our own shortcomings. So he's a racist, but what about you? So he's sexist and prejudiced against immigrants and the disabled, but what about me and my own prejudices? Are we all so blameless? Are there not many among us who are benefiting from the very racist system that the likes of Mr. Trump is protecting? Why are we not talking about that? Why not talk about our own complicity in upholding the systems where all humans are not treated equally? I think that there's a comfort in the notion that the way this world or this country, the way it is today, is other people's faults. But I think that instead of focusing on other people's, on leaders and other people, let's talk about the things we do and don't do, or the things we say or don't say that makes this country a hostile place for millions of people. Let's talk about the times when we treated others poorly because they were different. Rather than talk about mass incarceration of black men by the system and talk about how black children are lagging behind because of the failing educational system, I'd like to talk about what you see as your role in all of it. If you think you're just a spectator and play no role in it, I would love to adopt you because you're very cute. We could do like what Madonna and Angelina Jolie did, they adopted African children. Instead, I would adopt Americans. And I'll take you with me to Africa, and my people will say, oh, your American is so cute. And maybe when you come to my hometown, you see privileges that I've been blinded to. Just because I'm black doesn't mean there aren't systems of inequality that favor me. Celebrating difference means we must recognize the abominable structures that punish others while benefiting us. As painful or as shameful as it might be to speak of it, we must speak against it. Years ago, I recognized a privilege I'd never before considered. I was on vacation in my hometown. While there, a relative invited me and other relatives over to lunch in his house, which is in our ancestral village just outside of my hometown. It was a beautiful house right on the Atlantic Ocean. After lunch, we went to stand on some rocks on the beach, admiring the ocean. Then my relative said something I'll never forget. He said, right here, where we're standing, this is where the slaves walk as they headed to the ship. In that instant, I saw this image of my ancestors standing where I was, watching the slaves, doing nothing, as men and women and children from different tribes, all of them in chains, were left to be tossed aboard the Atlantic Ocean to drown or spend a lifetime in bondage as slaves in America. I thought, what if my ancestors were involved in the slave trade? It had never occurred to me that my village had any connection to slavery. I'd never heard such a story. The stories I'd heard were all about how other people from overseas took people from Africa, but I benefited nothing from it. It had never occurred to me how privileged I was to have grown up in my own native land, while my African-American friends had to live with the affliction of being the descendants of slaves. Recently, I was chatting with a cousin, and the story came up. My cousin told me that his father had excitedly told him that now that our village historical significance has come to light, we could do what other locations around Africa have done, make it into a touristic site, advertise on the internet, collect American dollars, maybe ask visiting Americans to help us get visas. Then my cousin said something. He said, we don't need a reminder of what happened in that place. What we need to do is to burn it all down. I was so proud of my cousin for saying that. I'll join you in burning down that place, I thought. And then I realized, oh wait, that would be an arson, and I'm not an arsonist. But we could all be arsonists of systems that propel inequality. I'll never know what my ancestors did or didn't do. But if they were complicit in the suffering of others because they were from different tribes, then it's a story I must own and share. I take no pride in that story. But by me telling you today, I hope we can all be freer to tell stories, even the things that we are ashamed of, even the things we're not very proud of, and that we can be honest with one another about our own prejudice, our own intolerance, our own inherited privileges. The world is not going to get better if only other people stop doing this or start doing that. It's easy to point fingers at the liberals, the conservatives, Middle America, the East Coast intelligentsia. If only they could be more like us, live by the same principles as us. Perhaps, but it's unlikely. I'm convinced that change is only going to come when we start considering the ways in which we use difference to divide, not the ways in which others do, but the ways in which we do. It's not a pretty process, but America needs it. And this country is so worth fighting for. Thank you.
We are so lucky for many reasons, but what a powerful night this is. Our next writer is Andrew Solomon, who's a writer and lecturer on politics, culture, and psychology, professor of clinical psychology at Columbia University Medical Center, and president of Penn American Center. He has won many awards, including the National Book Award, and his most recent book is Far and Away: How Travel Can Change the World. He writes regularly for The New Yorker and The New York Times. Please join me in welcoming Andrew Solomon.
Thank you all for coming out on this beautiful night to hear me, and what an honor to be up here with Min Jin and Imbolo. It's a real treat. I wrote in my last book about families, or my previous book, actually not my last one, but the one before, about families who are dealing with children who are different in a variety of ways. And I made the argument in it that all of us experience the feeling of difference. All of us encounter people who are different. And that while the individual differences can feel very isolating, the experience of negotiating difference within your relationships is in fact a universal. But we're in a time when our differences seem increasingly not to unite, but to divide us. Differences of identity, of nationality, of wealth, of freedom. The great 19th century naturalist Alexander von Humboldt once said, "There is no worldview so dangerous as the worldview of those who have not viewed the world." And increasingly, we are living under the auspices of people who have not viewed the world. I believe that journeys are a moral imperative for those who can afford them. They're a way to recover from our fear of otherness. We owe it to the world to be engaged. And I firmly believe that if every American were required to spend 2 weeks in a foreign country before the age of 30, no matter what country it was and no matter what they did there, that half of our diplomatic problems would go away through that experience of encounters. Thank you. And if you can't do another country, then do another town, even another neighborhood. Just engage with difference at all costs. Travel is both a window and a mirror. It's a window because you see into another society, but a mirror because it strips you bare of so much of what protects you in your own culture. If you don't know anyone who's like you, figuring out who you are is nearly impossible. But if you know only people who are like you, you become a caricature of yourself. Neither model needs to win. Neither subverts the other. Once we acknowledge them, our differences unite us. I'm a dual national of the US and the UK, and I've been appalled by the rise in nationalism in both countries. The voting results that have come in from Poland and Hungary, from Russia and Turkey, represent a rejection of diversity and of open borders. 18 months ago at the Conservative Party conference in the UK, Theresa May said, "There is no such thing as a citizen of the world. If you believe you are a citizen of the world, you don't understand what citizenship means. You are a citizen of nowhere." Donald Trump tweeted this spring, "If we don't have a wall system, we're not going to have a country." But they are wrong. Patriotism is not nationalism, and you can love your own country and love others. It's not a binary. And if the identity politics of the last 40 years have given us nothing else, they've given us the vocabulary of intersectionality, the understanding that we all have multiple identities, and that you can be old and conservative and British and gay, or young and deaf and radical and French, or Anglo-American, European, and a citizen of the world. Indeed, it is the shared fact of those various identities that gives us our complexity and makes us fully into human beings. My first book, now a long time ago, was about a group of Soviet artists and how their lives changed in the time of glasnost. And after I finished the book, I went back to visit my friends in Russia, thinking this will be very relaxing. I'm no longer writing a book. I'm no longer asking them a lot of questions. They were an extraordinary group of people. They were people who believed that they had been keeping the truth alive in the face of a society that wanted to annihilate truth itself. One of them said to me, "You see, we were in training to be not artists, but angels. And now that the Western market has opened up, nobody wants angels. It's artists that they're after." I was with this group of artists, and I got a call from someone with whom I was supposed to be having dinner saying that there had been a coup and that Gorbachev was in prison and that therefore she would not be able to have dinner with me. And I said, "Vika, if you want to cancel dinner, just cancel dinner." And when I got up a few hours later, of course, it was true. The right-wing coup had taken place. Gorbachev was indeed kidnapped and hidden, and the artists I was with all felt that it was their job to play a strong role in the resistance to the putsch, as they all called it. And so we all went down to the area around the Russian Parliament building, the so-called White House, and when we got there, everyone was trying to build barricades around the Parliament building against the possible approach of tanks. And there were people dragging various bits of construction detritus and so on and so forth. And there was one very big, very Soviet-looking woman who had managed to jumpstart a piece of construction equipment she clearly didn't really know how to use and was jerkily trying to lift concrete blocks into place to form a better barricade. And it was very fashionable at that time to wear T-shirts with English writing on them, even if you didn't know what they said. And she was wearing a T-shirt that said, "I'd rather be playing tennis." So the third day of the putsch, a group of the artists said to me that they wanted to go up and see where people had been killed the night before. And so we went all together up to the area near Smolenskaya. And after we got there, there were flowers on the ground. There were old women weeping and speaking of tragedy. And we were all standing around in this very Russian scene when suddenly a young man with a tweed cap clutched in his hand and wire-rimmed spectacles came running up to us. And he said, "There are tanks approaching the outer barricade. There are tanks approaching the outer barricade. Come with me now. We must defend the outer barricade." And we had heard rumors of tanks every day for 3 days, and the tanks had never come and tried to cross the barricades. And so we sort of sauntered up. It was raining. We were wet. We were bedraggled. We were exhausted. We sauntered up and ranged ourselves in front of the barricade, hand in hand. And then, somewhat to our surprise, a column of tanks did roll up. They're very big tanks. And the soldier on the front tank said, "If you get out of our way, there's no reason for us to harm you. But if you won't step out of our way, we'll have no choice but to run you down because we have been given unconditional orders to destroy this barricade." And one of the artists said, "Wait, give us just a minute to tell you why we're here." And the soldier on the front tank folded his arms, and the artist launched into a kind of Jeffersonian panegyric to democracy. They said, "You're very young, you don't remember what it was like to live under real oppression. Let me tell you what it was like, it was terrible." They said, "You say that you are only following orders, but you make a choice to follow these orders, and that choice will be upon you." And they finished this long speech, and we all stood there in the rain. And for a full minute, the soldier on the front tank just sat there with his arms folded. And then at the end of a minute, he said, "What you have said is true, and we must bow to the will of the people. If you'll clear us enough space, we'll turn our tanks around, and we'll leave you your barricade." And by the end of that day, the putsch had fallen, not because of that relatively insignificant episode, but perhaps because of a spirit in it that was to be found over and over again across the country. And last year, I was having lunch with one of those artists, Andre Reuter, and we were talking about that time, and I said, now Putin is in charge. I said, so much of what you believed in that moment that we were fighting for didn't come true. I said, do you regret it? And he said, regret it? No, I don't regret it. It's been the basis of everything that I've done since. It's like having a happy childhood. It's what gives you strength to go on to the next important thing. When I was in Afghanistan in February of 2002, reporting for The Times, I was writing mostly about the rebirth of culture, and I was therefore interviewing cultural people. But I was distressed that I had seen so few women. And finally, a friend of mine, who was sadly killed in a bombing in Iraq a few years later, a friend of mine in Kabul said, I will arrange for you to talk to 3 enlightened and feminist women. And these 3 interesting women came to the meeting with me, and they arrived wearing burqas, which they took off when they came inside. And I said, the Taliban has fallen. I said, you don't need to wear those things anymore. Why do you still have a burqa on? And the first woman said, well, if I go out without a burqa and I'm raped, people will say it was my own fault. And the second one said, the Taliban might come back to power, and if they find out who went out without a burqa, I might get in trouble. And then the third one said, I hate this thing, and I always swore I would burn it at the first possibility. But after 7 years, you grow accustomed to being invisible, and the prospect of being visible again is very stressful. All this talk of a wall between the US and Mexico, Britain's construction of the Great Wall of Calais to keep back illegal immigrants from continental Europe, the retainage of peace walls in Northern Ireland, the massive Hungarian border fence, Israel's move toward being a walled nation. Walls are concrete symbols of exclusion, and exclusion hurts those who are excluding as much as it hurts those who are excluded. It's a matter of overlooking how the liberal world order benefits all nations and represents a callow disregard for the spread of war, for nuclear proliferation. It would make America weak again, Britain too, trivializing a delicate peace forged after 2 world wars that is not a given. In fact, walls are our burqas. They are symbols of safety that oppress us. Internationalism is not a charity program to save the unwashed hordes from abroad. It's the recognition that the fate of nations has grown ever more inexorably entwined. Until we are all free, Emma Lazarus wrote, we are none of us free. No nation can achieve dignity except by extending it to others, just as no person can achieve dignity except by extending it to others. When I was in Tripoli writing about the late Gaddafi period, I interviewed his entire cabinet, and every member of that cabinet who wanted rapprochement with the West had studied abroad in the United States, the UK, or Western Europe. And every minister I met who wanted to continue as a rogue terrorist state had not done so. Keeping people out does not endear you to them. It damages the relationship. Quarantining otherness breeds ignorance of us that engenders hatred. It is openness that makes us safe. Theresa May had it inside out, and so does our president. We must take action as citizens of our countries, and yet embrace a larger whole. Because believing we cannot be citizens of the world will cost us the world of which we might have been citizens. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I just want to thank our authors again one more time and congratulate our young writers. And I think we all owe it to ourselves to your next book should be by somebody whose life is different than yours. And I'm just so moved. I don't know what to say. So I'm going to shut up now, and we're going to head out. Yeah.